Okay, Rabbi Sai, ladies and gentlemen, it's nice to see you all again and get back to our regular careers in learning and the literally infinite material which we can learn from Sefer Bereshis. I'm sticking with Sefer Bereshis round the clock, round the year, because it's just got so much depth to it and so many interesting features to it. And today I'd like to actually have a look at the very, very beginning, the beginning of the beginnings, the first 5 psukim in Sefer Bereshis. And I'm particularly interested to see how Sefer Bereshis gives us, if you like, the some type of a blueprint for much of the Torah ideas that are rolled out through all the Tanakh are based on the principles that we find in Bereshis. Actually, the truth is that Parshas Bereshis is probably one of the most neglected parshas in the Torah, because by the time you recover from Sukkot, it's already Parshas Noach. You know, most people don't really have the between the Sukkot and Shabbos Bereshis. Most people don't get a chance to go to a Parsha Shavua Shia or to sit down properly and learn the parsha. So now we're already into Parshas Noach, which is a pity because the parsha of Bereshis has got so many very fascinating themes to it. And we're going to be looking at it from a particular point of view this morning. I'd like to show you 2 or 3 or maybe more different angles, different ways in which Chazal understood and, if you like, unraveled the opening psukim of the Torah. So I'm going to give you a text in a minute, but I'd just like to say that the first, let me just tell you something very fascinating about the first pasuk of Bereshis, right? Probably one of the most famous psukim in the whole of the Chumash, right? Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es haaretz. In the beginning, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created heaven and earth. So there's a very fascinating theme here, which in Chazal, connecting the creation of the world to Matan Torah. Why are these 2 events connected? Certainly, within the narrative of the Chumash, these 2 events are certainly seen to be the two pillars, really, of the whole of our Jewish life, right? And what we generally refer to as emunah, right? We use the word emunah to mean belief in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but in actual fact, the term emunah has got many, many different layers to it. We don't just believe in the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Many other religions, and maybe even non-religious people, believe in the existence of God. Spinoza believed in the existence of God, so did Aristotle and Plato. They all believed in the existence of a God. But when you get into Bereshis, bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es haaretz, you're saying much more than the existence of God. You're saying that the entire universe, right, was brought into existence by an act of creation of God. And that's a completely different thesis. That's a completely different emunah, right? It's more than simply that God exists, right? Aristotle and Spinoza, they all believed that God existed alongside of the universe. That God didn't create the universe didn't create God, but the 2 existed eternally forever. There always was God and there always was a universe. And the 2 somehow existed backwards in time to eternity. And this was a very, very standard belief among many intellectuals for thousands of years. But when we speak about Bereshis, bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es haaretz, it's our belief in God the Creator, which really sets the whole of the Chumash in motion. Incidentally, I think it's a very interesting theme, which maybe we'll talk about at some later stage, but I think many people are aware of the fact that in Vayikra, the pasuk v'ohavta l'reacha kamocha, right? To love your neighbors yourself. So we use the phrase there, Rabbi Akiva says, Ze klal godol b'Torah, right? You come across that, right? Ze klal godol b'Torah, that is the great principle of the Torah. However, some of the Mefarshim say that in actual fact, that pasuk is the klal godol of Sefer Vayikra. But each one of the 5 books of the Chumash has its own pasuk, which is the klal godol b'Torah. There is one in Bereshis, one in Shemos. So in Bereshis, the pasuk, which is the klal godol b'Torah, which is the general principle on which everything rests, is this first pasuk. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'es haaretz. That is the key pasuk, which gives us an understanding that the existence of God is not divorced from the physical existence of the universe, but quite the contrary. HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought into existence and maintains it in existence. That is the first pasuk. And if you look at Sefer Shemos and you ask yourself, what is the klal godol b'Torah and Sefer Shemos? The answer is Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotzeisecha me'eretz Mitzrayim. That is the key pasuk. So in Bereshis, the key pasuk is our understanding of the universe, the origins of the universe, and the connection to God the Creator. That is, if you like, the key to understanding all the events in Bereshis. In Shemos, the key is Anochi Hashem Elokecha. In Vayikra, it's V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. What is it in Bamidbar? Right? So in Bamidbar, so the Mefarshim say, in Bamidbar, the key phrase is Yivarechacha Hashem v'yishmerecha. Right? The idea of HaKadosh Baruch Hu conveying a bracha down into this world via the Kohanim, via the Torah, via mitzvahs, all sorts of different ways in which brachas, birkas Hashem, descends into this world. So that's the key. That's the klal godel of Sefer Bamidbar. And in Devarim, the key pasuk is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. So each one of the 5 books of the Chumash has its own klal godol b'Torah, has its own, if you like, key pasuk, from which all the other details in some way derive their importance and derive their inspiration. So Bereshis bara Elokim is not just an introductory sentence, but actually is a klal godol, is a principle on everything. Incidentally, I'm not sure if I mentioned this to you before, but having just this morning davened Hallel, there is in the first paragraph of Hallel a very interesting pasuk, which relates a little bit to what I've just now said, and then brought out by the commentary of the Malbim on Tehillim. The Malbim on Tehillim in general is a most magnificent work, and brings in lots of ideas where you don't expect them. So he says as follows: the pasuk in the very first paragraph of Hallel says, "Rom al kol goyim Hashem ala shomayim kavoda." What does that mean? So it means that even among the goyim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is recognized as Rom. Rom, Reish Mem, means elevated, spiritual, infinite, all-powerful. HaKadosh Rom al kol goyim Hashem. The goyim also acknowledge the greatness of God, but what is their mistake? They believe that al hashamayim kavod, that God resides in the heavens and is not interested and is not involved in the physical universe. That the creation of the physical universe, the continued existence of the universe, and in fact all activities that take place in the material world, right, is not connected to the existence of God. That was the belief of Aristotle, and that was the belief of Spinoza, that God existed, but he was ala shamayim kavoda. He lived in the world of the infinite and was not connected to the world of the finite at all. Right? The non-Jewish philosophers could not get past the idea that the infinite God connected himself to a finite universe or to finite human beings. That was, if you like, one of the main downfalls of secular philosophy over the ages. I remember studying Spinoza in university, and it was crystal clear, coming from a Torah point of view, it was crystal clear how he got shipwrecked in his beliefs, because he just couldn't get past the idea that Roma Kol Goyim Hashem Ala Shamayim Kavoda. But how does the paragraph continue in Tehillim? So David HaMelech says, yes, the Goyim recognize God, they believe him to be disconnected from the free material world, but mi kashem Elokeinu hamagbihi l'shoves, our understanding of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that indeed he does reside. Magbihi l'shoves means he resides in the world of the Ein Sof, but mashpili liros pashamayim v'oretz, he lowers himself. Mashpil means he descends into the world of shamayim v'oretz, right? And that is Bereishis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'oretz. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is descending from the world of the infinite into the creation of a finite world of shamayim v'oretz, and that's what and that, says the Malbim, is the topic of the first paragraph of Hallel. And then the next psukim only just spell it out, right? Right? All these are just descriptions of ways in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu interacts with the physical world, with human life, with human behavior. All these ideas, right, which are so central to Torah life, only get off the ground after you've read Bereishis chapter 1, Pasuk 1, Bereishis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'ha'aretz. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in a sense, in the Torah, this is the Sfas Emes says this in a number of places, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself twice. In the narrative of the Tanakh, HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself twice, once in the creation and once at Har Sinai. These are the two ways, the two moments where there is a moment what we refer to often as Gilui Shechina, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu manifests his power and his wisdom in our world. Right? We can see HaKadosh Baruch Hu in nature and in the physical world, and we can also see HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Torah. These were the two moments when there was a Gilui Shechina, and therefore in many places, and I'll show you this in Rashi in a few places, Chazal understood that the events of Bereishis and the events of Har Sinai are really very intimately interconnected. Let me tell you one very interesting observation of the Baal HaTurim. By the Baal HaTurim, one of the great Rishonim, whose commentary on the Chumash usually is just one or two lines or even half a line, and he just, but he observes the Baal HaTurim had a brilliant analysis of the letters and the words of the Torah. Even without a search machine and a hard disk, he knew exactly how many words and how many letters there were in the Torah, and he was able to bring connections which are very fascinating. So he says, if you look at the pasuk, Bereishis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'ha'aretz, you see a pasuk with 7 words, Bereishis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'ha'aretz, and how many letters? Anybody know how many letters?
26.
28 letters. 28 letters, 7 words, and 28 letters. Okay, why is that important? Okay, the truth is the 28 is already referred to Beremez in a pasuk that Rashi brings down from the very beginning, in the pasuk Koyach Masov Higid La'amo, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told us about Koyach Masov, of the power of his actions, and Koyach, of course, Kafches, is 28. So Koach Masov Higid La'amo is a veiled reference to the 28 letters of this pasuk. Says the Baal HaTurim, where else in the Torah is there a pasuk with 7 words and 28 letters? Who would know the answer to a question like that, right? How many people in the world have gone through the Chumash? Has anyone seen this? Okay, that's the third part of this Dvar Torah. I'm now looking at the second part. The second part is there is another pasuk which has 7 words and 28 letters, and that is the introductory pasuk to the 10 Commandments. Right? And then Anochi Hashem Elokecha, right? So the introductory pasuk to Matan Torah has also got 7 words and 28 letters. So you have the introductory pasuk to the creation and the introductory pasuk to Matan Torah are structurally mirror images of each other, right? They're both structured along the lines of 7 words and 28 letters. And now Phil can add his Dvar Torah. And therefore, says the Balaturim, when Chazal came to write the text of Yiskadal v'Yiskadal Shemei Rabbah, of the Kaddish that we say in davening, so what is the central pasuk of the whole of Kaddish? So what did you just now say, Phil?
Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mavorach.
Yes, Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mavorach la'olam ul'omei ul'mayra, right? Is not actually a pasuk in the Torah anywhere. It's a sentence that was written by Chazal, but they dafka, says the Balaturim, wrote a sentence which has got Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mavorach la'olam ul'omei ul'mayra, has got 7 words and 28 letters in it, right? In order to capture this connection between Brias HaOlam, the creation of the world, and Matan Torah, on the other hand. And in some way, this is, in other words, that one sentence of Yehei Shmei Rabbah is a microcosm, if you like, a shorthand way of drawing that all-important connection between the creation of the physical universe on the one hand, and the creation of the Torah on the other hand. So here you have something very fascinating already from the very beginning. I think what I'm going to do now is let's look at a bit of text together. I'll show you some really very interesting material here. Let's see if I can find this text. Give me one moment, please. Second. I'm a bit out of practice with Zoom. Let's see if we can do this now. Ellie, can you see this? Yes, you got it? Right, Shirley's giving me the thumbs up, so that means we're in business. Okay, so this is really, on the screen, you can see in front of you the first 5 psukim of the Torah. And there's so many very fascinating ideas developed here. But we're talking initially about the very first pasuk, right? This first pasuk that everybody knows off by heart. Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim ves haaretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. What's interesting is that Rashi takes the view that the word Bereshis is from a Hebrew point of view, from a Pshat point of view, it's problematic, right? What is problematic about the word Bereshis? Because Rashi believes, and most of the Mefarshim believe, not all, but most of the Mefarshim believe that actually, when we speak about Reshis, Reshis means the beginning of. It's what's called a construct. It's a construct form. Doesn't mean in the beginning. In the beginning would be Batchila or Barishona, right? You say Barishona or in the beginning. That will be the beginning. But Reshis implies it's the beginning of something. It's the beginning of. So, for example, in the Tanakh, we find that when a new king sits on the throne, so the Prophet says, "But Reshis Mamlachtoi, in the beginning of his reign, this and this happened." Or when the Torah gives us the mitzvah of Chala It says, Reishis arisosteichem, you should take the first bit of the dough should be given, taken off as challah. So Reishis means the beginning of something. But here, the word Bereshis stands alone. It's not the beginning of anything. So Rashi, and therefore Rashi here says, let's have a look. Rashi uses his famous phrase of Rashi, which is Bereshis bara, says Rashi. Can you see I've highlighted this for you? Bereshis bara, says Rashi, Ein hamikra hazeh omer ela dorsheni. This pasuk needs a drush. Whenever Rashi says a pasuk needs a drush, what he means is that the pshat is difficult. There's a problem in the pshat. Why is it not the Bereshis of? So Rashi says straight away something very fascinating. Rashi says, K'moshe darshura b'seider. So Chazal already told us what it means. Says Rashi, what does Bereshis mean? And here comes the key word in Rashi, Bishvil Torah shenikra Reishis Darka. The Torah itself is referred to in Mishlei as Reishis Darko. Can you see that? As the beginning of the derech of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the beginning of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence manifesting itself in this world. That was the Torah. So what is the base of B'er? When we look at the B'er ratios, we think it's a time reference. Usually it is. Right? B'er usually means bayom, balayla, means in the sense that at a particular time. But here Rashi says a most important word. Rashi says that actually the base is not a base of time, but it means bishvil. Bishvil. Okay, what does Rashi mean here by bishvil? Any offers? What does he mean here when he says bishvil haTorah? How would you translate bishvil haTorah? Anybody? Any offers on this?
Because of,
yes.
Yes.
What do you say? Yes, because of, in the sense that for the purpose of. In other words, the world was created for the purpose of creating a world in which it was possible that the Torah could be applied, the Torah could be accessible, and the Torah could be understood. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates a world b'shvil HaTorah, for the purpose of the Torah. Shenikras Reishis Darka, right? And Rashi goes on to say, and also, Rashi continues to say, Ubishvil Yisrael, Shenikru Reishis Tivuasa. Right? So here as well, Rashi says the word Reishis is found in a few places in the Tanakh, and Rashi quotes two of them. Right? One is a reference to the Torah, that the word Reishis means the Torah, and the word Reishis also is used by Yirmiyah to refer to Klal Yisrael. But the concept, the word Bereshis means the world was created for this purpose. The world was created for this purpose. I just want to pause on this for a minute, because so we can't really have much of an idea about how the world came into existence. Right? We're talking about the greatest miraculous power of God bringing the universe into existence, from the smallest atom and DNA particle to the furthest galaxies of the universe, were all brought into existence in Bereshis Bara Elokim. We can't really understand how that happened, but one thing we do know, right? One thing we do know, Rashi says, is that it was done for a purpose. The Rashi says the first letter of the first word means that the world was created for a purpose. And it's interesting. Why is this interesting, particularly in the modern world? Because in the 19th, 20th, and 21st century, this is in fact one of the biggest intellectual differences that the Torah world has with science. science also has a thesis about how the world came into existence and how did it come to be that in the world there are these trees and these plants and these animals and these human beings. How did that happen? And they use a term which we're all familiar with, which is evolution. And the truth is, evolution, the idea that more complex life forms evolved out of more simple life forms, is not problematic for the Torah at all. In fact, if anything, if you look at the 6 days of creation, you can see clearly that the 6 days are in some way more and more complex life forms are being created, and there could easily have been evolution, and evolution at some level could have, and evolution could certainly, and certainly was a tool in the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu for bringing lots of animals and plants into existence. HaKadosh Baruch Hu used evolution, used an evolutionary process. What is our big problem with evolution? What is the central problem that we have with the scientific concept of evolution? And it's interesting that Rashi, writing all these hundreds of years ago, quoting Chazal, is in the very beginning of the very first pasuk, is addressing that problem. Rashi says that science, secularism, and secular point of view will tell us that the world came into existence through a random process. It's the randomness of evolution which runs completely against our emunah. It's not evolution itself. Evolution could easily be a process by which things came into existence. But the idea of the secular world is that there was no guiding hand, there was no divine intelligence, there was no creator at all. It all just happened by chance, completely by chance. It's completely by chance that human beings came to live, completely by chance that we have trees and animals and solar systems and galaxies and whatever it is. Everything happened just randomly. Right? That is the secular concept of evolution. And it's the random idea which runs completely contrary to the idea of b'shvil rashis, the idea that the world was created by a divine intelligence for a purpose. There was a purpose here. Of course, once you agree that the world had a purpose, then you're forced to ask the second question, which is, what is that purpose? What is that purpose? And then you have to ask the third question, which is, what role can I play in bringing that purpose into existence? And then you're into a religious life. Once you understand the purpose of the Torah is the Torah itself and living a life of Avodat Hashem, a life of mitzvahs of chesed and emunah, so then you've already left secularism miles away. And the secularist has to believe in randomness. He can't allow him. I've had lots of discussions over the years. Some of you might have seen, incidentally, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs had some public debates with some famous atheists. Always great, it's always, if you're ever a bit bored, you can go onto YouTube and look up Jonathan Sachs's debates with with Michael Harris and some of these people, some who've written books about atheism and how the world came into being simply through chance mutations, which in a random way gave rise to the emergence of mammals, and then the emergence of the human being was all completely by chance. And Rabbi Sachs really, on many occasions, really had an opportunity to try and undercut the atheists' arguments in a very, very elegant and very British, understated way. Rabbi Sachs, Zechron Lebracha, had a most remarkable way of dealing with these issues. But I find it particularly fascinating, coming back to the pasuk and Rashi, that here we have a pasuk with Rashi, and Rashi from the very beginning of the Torah is giving us an interpretation of the first word of the Torah. He says, if you understand the first word of the Torah properly, then the first word is telling us that the world came into existence for a purpose. and that purpose was developed through, firstly, the creation of the Torah, and secondly, the creation of Klal Yisrael. And that was the purpose for which the world was created by God. And all God-fearing sort of Jews and non-Jews over the years have believed in God the Creator. Don't forget, also in Lahavdil, in the Christian world, they also believe in God the Creator. They also believe that the world was created by God and that He's involved in our lives. And one can pray to God and we are accountable to God. That is something the Christian world also believes in, as does Islam. Right? In other words, the idea of God not as, it's only the secular philosophers and secularism in general, right? The secular scientific, the secular academic world, the secular world of Bible critics and of pure scientists, that they are really, they can't possibly accept the idea that the world was created for a purpose. And that, I've always found it very fascinating that is really in Rashi, not just in the first pasuk of the Torah, not just in the first word of the Torah, but in the first letter of the first word of the first pasuk of the Torah. Rashi says the base of Bereshis is Bishvil. Bishvil means there was a goal. There was a goal in mind. The Creator had a goal in mind, and that was the Bereshis Bara Elokim. Let's continue what Rashi says here. Let's go back to the text for a moment. And here Rashi spells out a little bit the what is his problem with the pshat of Bereshis. So Rashi says, "In bosol of farish kipshuta, if you still want to explain the pasuk on a pshat level, right? Kach pirshu, this is the way you have to explain it, because according to Rashi, Bereshis is what he calls dovuk. Dovuk means it's a construct form. It has to be the beginning of something. So Rashi says you could, if you wanted to, translate this pasuk to mean as follows. What does it mean? Bereshis bara Elokim as Shemayim v'aretz. It means Bereshis brias Shemayim v'aretz, in the beginning of the creation of the heaven and the earth. What was the situation? V'aretz haisel sahu v'bohu v'choshech, and v'yom Elokim yihiyah. Right? Bohamik. Right? Okay, I'm not going to go into this too much. Rashi is simply saying, if you want to insist on the pshat, there is a way through the pshat. You can see clearly that Rashi prefers to take us down the route of the drush of Chazal, that Bereshis means b'shvil Bereshis. I want to show you something very beautiful in the Ramban. Let's move on for a minute to the Ramban. Let's have a look. So the Ramban writes as follows. Let's look at the Ramban. Tzorech gadol hu lahatchil haTorah b'Bereshis bara Elokim. It's extremely important, says the Ramban, that the Torah begins with a statement of God the Creator. Says the Ramban, why is that? Ki shorish ha'emunah, because this is Kita Aleph of our emunah. Kita Aleph is God the Creator. And if someone does not have emunah in God the Creator, right, this word kadmon is the word the Ramban uses to describe Aristotle. Right? And he believes that the world always existed backwards in time, infinitely. And it was like God always existed, so did the world always exist. That's what he means, Olam Kadmo. And that was the view of all the ancient Greek philosophers. But somebody who accepts that view and denies God the Creator, says the Ramban, what do we say about him? Who kaifa be'ikar. He has denied the essence of our emunah. V'ein lo Torah klal. V'ein lo Torah klal. He can't possibly have a Torah, because the Torah assumes that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that we are accountable to God, that God wants us to behave and to think in a particular way, and that we can communicate with HaKadosh Baruch Hu through Nevuah, through Tefillah, right? But if you don't believe in God the Creator, if you believe that God and the world are just two parallel lines, sort of continuing backwards in time forever and forwards in time forever, but that they never meet, right? Which is the secular view. Then, so the language of the Ramban is very, very powerful. That to not believe that is to lose the Torah completely. I'd just like to add one little thing, which I've always found very fascinating. I said, from the time of Plato and Aristotle, which is basically 2,500 years ago, all the way through all the secular philosophers of the Middle Ages and the modern world, and Spinoza, and all the way through until 1960. Very interesting thing, that. Until 1960, right? The axiomatic belief, the foundational belief of the secular philosophical and scientific world was that the world had always existed. It was only in the early 1960s that somebody, I've forgotten his name, he got a Nobel Prize for proving that the physical world as we know it had a beginning. And what we refer to usually as the Big Bang. It became known as the Big Bang Theory. But not many people realize that the Big Bang Theory was a complete reversal of what was considered to be the absolute philosophical truth. That everybody, all the Aristotelians and the Platonists and the medieval philosophers and all the Spinozists, all of them believed be'emunah shalema, right? They believed that there was never a beginning to the physical universe. Now, post-1960, right? Post-1960, just in the last 60 years, it has become a foundational belief of all scientists that the world did have a beginning in time. There was a moment when the world came into existence, and that before that Big Bang, there was no physical world at all. Right? That idea is it's a most amazing idea to me, to show you how the beliefs, however firmly they are held, and however powerfully they are insisted upon by all these great minds, in actual fact, they were just speculating. It was all speculative. In actual fact, science today believes most firmly that there was a beginning to the creation of the world, right? And that in actual fact, I've discussed this on a number of occasions with a few scientists. If you try and ask a scientist, a regular secular scientist, so tell me, you believe in the Big Bang. So what you believe in science? Science is a study of cause and effect. You don't have any effect without a cause, right? So what caused the Big Bang? What power was there that brought the Big Bang into existence? There must have been something. If you believe that every cause has every effect is derivative of a previous cause, and that cause and effect are linked together, right, in a deterministic way. So how could you possibly ever have a Big Bang where something came out of nothing? Science never believes that something comes out of nothing, right? If you have something, that means that there was something beforehand, which simply, if you've got steam, it means before that there was water, and the water changed into steam, right? And before that, whatever it was, there was always something which was a previous existence. But simply to say, right, you know what, this animal or this tree or this element of some sort came into existence without any pre-existing cause is unintelligible in science, right? And yet, the whole universe is understood by scientists to have come about by a Big Bang, which was an effect without a cause. So we understand, of course, that the Big Bang was the Yad Hashem, and the Big Bang really is Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'haaretz. That was the moment of the Big Bang. That was the moment when HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought something into existence from nothing. And prior to that, there was nothing. When scientists incidentally speak about this, they say, yes, the Big Bang was a singularity, which is a very sort of, it's a fashionable word for fudging the issue. Right? A singularity means it was a single unrepeated event in history where this indeed did take place. Something came into existence from nothing. This has never happened before, never happened since. And it's a singularity. And somehow they think that by using the word singularity, that answers the question. But of course it doesn't. It only highlights the question. How do you get a singularity? How do you get something happening which is a complete denial of the whole scientific world of cause and effect? Anyhow, this is an interesting aspect of the Ramban, and the Ramban was very interested. I want to show you something very fascinating. I want to show you something very fascinating that the Ramban describes, which I find completely remarkable. So he says, Va'ata. Where's Va'ata? Okay. Sorry. So he says here, Va'ata. Let's look at this highlighted text here for a minute. Right? So he says here, Va'ata Shema Perush HaMikra Al Peshuto Nochoin Uboro. This is the Ramban coming in with a bombastic statement saying, I'm going to tell you once and for all what is the authoritative meaning of Bereshis Bara Elokim Es Hashemayim V'Haaretz. What was God creating in this first pasuk? So he writes as follows. So he says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu bara kol hanivroim me afisa muchletes. Interesting Hebrew this. What does the word afisa mean? Comes from the word ephes, right? Ephes. Ephes means zero, right? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the whole of the universe out of nothingness. And then he goes on to say, Ve'ein etzleinu b'loshen HaKodesh v'otzaz hayesh me'ayin elo loshen bara. The word bara has got a special meaning, he says, in the Tanakh, and it means yesh me'ayin, that something came into existence out of nothing. Ve'ein kol hana'aseh tachas hashemesh olamala hova min ha'ayin atchala rishon. But he says something interesting. He says, after that 1 millisecond of yesh me'ayin, right? What they speak about as ex nihilo, right? The creation of the universe from nothing. After that second, it never happened again. It never happened again. In other words, all subsequent creations were modifications and developments and evolved forms of previous forms. So let's have a look what he says. So what does this mean? This Ramban, I think, has got some very interesting meaning in the modern world. Because in the modern world, if you speak to science, if you look in books about the Big Bang, if you like, you can Google the Big Bang and explanations by cosmologists and scientists about how the world came into existence. What exactly came into existence according to science in the very first second of the Big Bang? So it was a creation of energy and light by He-Or, corresponds exactly to the by He-Or, but more than that, it was what they call a soup of subatomic particles. In other words, it was all different bits, right, which hadn't been joined together yet to make atoms and make molecules and to make any material universe. It was just like a giant Lego set of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He brought into existence, and the Ramban, 800 years ago, speaks about this. Look at this. HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought into existence something which was Yesod Dak Ma'od, something which existed, but it had a very a very undefined existence. So he says, Ein bo mamash. Ein bo mamash. It didn't have any real substance to it. Aval hu koach. Interesting. Second, I'm sorry. Ein bo mamash. Aval, what is it, says the Ramban? Aval hu koach mamtzi. Koach mamtzi. It is, he brought into existence certain subatomic particles which had the potential to be combined together to create elements, to create planets, to create earth, to create water. All those initial subatomic particles, what were they? He says, Muchon lekabel hatzura. They were all made specially that they could be, they could adopt various different formats, and to develop from potential into real. Vahu hachomer harisha. And this was the first creation of chomer. Chomer means matter. So in actual fact, what's happening here is the Ramban is giving us a very beautiful parish. What happened in the first pasuk of 7 words? What was brought into existence? Nothing yet. There wasn't yet an oretz of a planet Earth and the solar system. All those were created much later. But he created the raw materials out of which later on he could engage in a different activity. Not Berea. Berea took place in 1 second. After that, he engaged in Yetzirah. Right? When Adam Arishon is created, it says by Yitzer, the process of Yetzirah and the process of Asiyah. All these verbs in the Torah, Yetzirah and Asiyah, are verbs describing a process of creation using some pre-existent matter, just shaping it into a particular form. But that there should exist some initial sort of chomer gelem, some raw material, right? It's like stem cells, right? In the modern world, stem cells, in my mind, are always a perfect example of cells where it hasn't been decided yet, actually, what form they're going to take. Right? The stem cells in the fetus can become brain cells, they can become skin cells, they become muscle cells, they can be cells in the hair, cells in the eye, they can become anything. Those are the stem cells. That's what the Ramban's talking about. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, so why does it say Eser Shemayim Ves Haaretz? So look what he goes on to say as follows. That actually HaKadosh Baruch Hu created 2 different types of raw materials. V'dai, it's important to know. Ki hashamayim v'chol asher bohem chomer echad. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created one chomer, one raw material, from which he made the heavens. And for the Ramban, the heavens here doesn't mean the sky, and doesn't mean outer space. It means the world of neshamas and the world of malachim, the spiritual world. The spiritual world of malachim and neshamas and olam haba and all our ideas of a spiritual world, they also didn't exist before Bereshis bara Elokim. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu first brought into existence a certain type of raw material out of which he could create, let's say, the human neshama, and then, says the Ramban, v'ha'oretz v'chol asher bo chomer echad. And then there was another type of chomer, of raw material, out of which he made the physical universe. HaKadosh Baruch Hu borrow elu shnei me'ayin. And these 2 were created out of nothing. So something ex nihilo. Ushneim levado nivroim. And only this was created ex nihilo. Only this. V'hakol nasim meher. Brilliant. Everything subsequently was made using this raw materials. And what's beautiful here is, and I've heard this from several scientists, that this description of the Ramban, writing in the 13th century, explaining the first pasuk in the Torah, is very, very close to the descriptions we have today of the initial existence of subatomic particles, which later on came together to create different atoms, different elements, different aspects of creation. But the great difference between our description and the scientist's description is that we believe that it was brought about through the Ratzon Hashem. It was a moment of the Ratzon Hashem. The Baruch Hu brought it into being, and that he brought it into being for a purpose. And they believe that it just was a random explosion, which they can't explain. It was a singularity, a random explosion, where suddenly, out of nothing, suddenly there was something. And then that something just developed into the most magnificent universe that we can possibly imagine. And we're all discovering all the time greater and greater powers and beauties in the physical universe, which was clearly all just the Chochmas HaBoreh, the wisdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. On the simplest level, right? The fact that human beings and mammals breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, that trees absorb carbon dioxide and give out oxygen, is the most amazing fact. But it's a fact, it's one detail, one tiny detail about the whole of nature, without which there couldn't be any human life in this world, right? The interaction between trees and humans in terms of providing and use of oxygen is something which is clearly designed and which was meant to be and wasn't just by chance, right? And also, I mean, there are millions and millions of examples in nature where everything is so finely tuned, right? If the planet Earth was slightly closer to the sun, all the water would evaporate. If it was slightly further away from the sun, all the water would freeze. Right? The Earth goes around the sun at a distance which is exactly able, a very, very small window in water, that it's liquid. Water in the universe, in outer space, water is always either ice or steam. It's never liquid. It's only on Earth that water is liquid, right? And that is part of the fine-tuning of Bereshis Bara Elokim, that we have liquid water. In fact, when scientists are looking for life on other planets, what they're really looking for is water, signs that there was once water, because without liquid water, there can't be any life. And this is the way in which the Torah, on every single little detail, is finely tuned, and we can see, if we have the eye to want to see it, we can see the Borei Olam, the way in which I can Bereshis Bara Elokim Es HaShamayim Es Haaretz. So just to summarize for a minute, we've got 7 words, 28 letters, which connect us to the 10 Commandments, Har Sinai, connects us to Yehei Shmei Rabbo, connects us to the idea of the world having a purpose, and connects us to the idea that there was one single moment of Yesh Me'ayin, ex nihilo, something came into existence out of nothing, and then for the rest of the process of creation, that original raw material was shaped and formed to make planets, to make earth, to make water, to make animals, and ultimately to make human beings. And that was all part of Bereshis Bara Elokim Es HaShamayim Es Haaretz. That's it, Rabbi Sir. I think that's all we have time for today. It's wonderful to see you.
Rabbi Kimche?
George, yes.